Welcome along to today's show, a really interesting vegan debate for you. And if you're watching here on YouTube, do make sure to like today's video, subscribe to the channel, and of course you can get more from Unbelievable via our weekly podcast and our newsletter. You can find a link with today's show. So today on the show, we're doing the vegan debate. Should Christians eat meat, we're asking. Now, veganism, the practice of not consuming meat, dairy, or indeed any animal product, has become an increasingly popular lifestyle choice in recent years. Vegan food options are often available in restaurants and supermarkets, and a survey in the US found a 300% increase in vegans between 2004 and 2019. That's about 3% of the population in the US, nearly 10 million people. So is veganism the ethical thing? Should Christians stop eating meat and go veggie? That's what we're asking on Unbelievable this week. And to discuss both sides of this, I'm joined by Greg Boyd and Joshua D. Jones. Now, Greg Boyd is no stranger to this show. He's a theologian, a church leader in the US who's a committed vegetarian. You may not have known that about Greg. He's actually transitioning to vegan. And he believes that it does reflect a life closer to God's ideal for a violence-free creation and is a healthier, more ethical choice for Christians. Joshua Jones is a church leader in the UK. He's from the States originally, though. He's the author of various books, including Elijah Men Eat Meat, though that is not, in fact, an argument for meat eating or against vegetarianism, as you'll hear. But Joshua is nevertheless a champion of low-carb, meat-rich diets, which he says was the key to his own health improving. So we'll hear his story as well. Our vegetarian and carnivore are ready to go. We're going to debate veganism today. Let's welcome you both. Greg and Joshua, thanks for being with me. Start with you, Greg, because it was when I was on the hunt for a suitable vegetarian or vegan that someone said, "Oh, did you know Greg Boyd is a vegetarian?" And I don't think I'd quite realised that, even though we have spoken on various occasions. So tell us about your journey to vegetarianism, Greg, and where you're at now, as you say you're transitioning to being vegan.
Yeah, well, thanks, Justin. I always enjoy being on here. I think this kind of dialogue is really, really good, especially in a world that's increasingly unable to have decent dialogue. It's good for Christians to model this. So, and this is the topic that I'm really excited about. So thanks for having me on. I always tell people I was a vegetarian at heart for about 10 years before I actually made the decision, because I loved eating meat. I grew up on rare steak, rare hamburger. I mean, we were just a carnivore family. So I felt increasingly uneasy with it, but it was a hard thing to kick. I get that transition is not always easy. But finally, for me, the core issue was I just, in my own spiritual journey, have gotten increasingly grieved by violence, and it just seems like the closer I get to, the more I get to know God, the more grieved I am just by how violence permeates every aspect of our society and of the world. And I got to the point where I didn't want anything to do with it. I felt God was calling me to, as much as possible, be free of all violence, purge my life, including my thoughts and my attitudes, my heart, from all things that are violence. And I would define violence as anything that violates the inherent worth of another. And so it was a commitment to never take human life, and a commitment to not take any other life as much as possible. Now, if I'm on an island, shipwrecked on an island, and there's one bunny, and I'm starving, the bunny's got to go, okay? And there's other situations where I think that
Sure.
if I'm over in Haiti and all they have to offer is a chicken, I'm going to eat the chicken. That's hospitality. But as a general rule, I try to avoid killing anything. I don't even try to kill insects. There's exceptions. Centipedes are just of the devil, and they've got to go. But mosquitoes, same thing. But as much as I try to catch them and then set them free. And I think, the thing for me is that when you look at a cow and all you see is meat, you miss the beauty of the cow. And this choice of mine has opened my eyes to just see beauty where I didn't see it before, and in a depth I haven't seen it before. Jesus says that if you hate in your heart, it's the same as murder, and if you lust in your heart, it's the same as adultery. And so it's mostly for me an internal thing, to be purging any kind of violating thoughts I have, which I found I was thoroughly polluted with. So that's my That's kind of why I came to this decision.
Very interesting. How long then has that been for you? And do you miss meat at any level?
It's been 17 years. It was 2004 when I finally made the commitment. So yeah, 17 years. And no, I don't miss meat. I don't. In fact, it kind of grosses me out. When I see someone just devouring a steak, I have to kind of do a mental thing to not, I just cringe. It just bugs me. But yeah, I'm not tempted at all. And the thing is, in 2004. Becoming a vegetarian it felt like quite a sacrifice, probably because it was new to me. But the vegetarian industry has gotten so good at producing this it's not hard at all. I mean, there's this frozen foods your options are many. And so it's even hard to feel self-righteous anymore. It really is just a bummer.
Well, let's talk to you now, Joshua. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I think, as I said, you're you used to be in the US, you're now based in the UK, you're a church leader there. And yeah, you're a fan of meat. So do you find that church and meat go together? Are you do you proselytize for meat as well as for God?
Well, I'm a big fan of people being free to eat what they want. And if they enjoy and their bodies and their health thrive on animal products, that's fantastic. If they eat more plant-based and their health is doing well and they're happy and they're giving thanks to God, that's what I'm really for. I'm for eating thankfully and freely and people not being judgmental towards one another. And I really appreciate Greg's just even the correspondence leading up to this discussion. I've dealt with some feisty vegans in my time that aren't only vegan, but think everyone else should be too. And of course, there are some carnivores who feel the same way. So I don't go around proselytizing for meat, but certainly within my home, there's a lot of animal products to be eaten.
Okay, so what kind of interactions have you had with vegans? What's been your sense of the way the vegans you meet, maybe online, have carried themselves and their arguments?
Well, of course, I mean, I jest a little bit, but I have some friends, other missionaries, people in ministry who are either vegetarian or vegan. They're fine people. They're wonderful people. What maybe motivated me to blog more about this and write now, my book's out, Meat, a Brief Biblical Theology, is out there. It's more a defense of people who want to eat animal products and who enjoy steak and hamburgers and yogurt and milk and these different things, and want to be able to enjoy this without feeling ashamed like they're doing something wrong or dirty. I think it was a few years ago when, there's a lot of people in the media really highlighting veganism, which for some people might have been great, but then other people almost whispered, had to kind of, whenever they mentioned that they had a hamburger for lunch, they kind of looked over to their shoulder, make sure nobody was looking, like they just watched a dirty movie or something. And so I was wanting to come to the defense of not necessarily pure carnivores who eat nothing but meat, but people who enjoy meat as part of a diet, and just defend that this is part of God's creation and to be consumed with thanksgiving.
So what about your own experience with eating meat? Because you're actually on quite a meat-rich diet. You think that that's quite a healthy option in some ways, even though the received wisdom for a long time has been, we should cut down on our meat, we should cut down on fat, we should, have everything as skinny as possible. What's your you take a different view to that, don't you?
Well, I can just share my own journey, what worked for my health and my body. And of course, different people's, their bodies react differently to different foods. So when I was in my mid to late 20s, my health started taking a downward turn. And this was everything from weight gain to lots of dental issues, constantly having cavities, brain fog, fatigue, numerous issues. I went to a doctor, even switched doctors for a while. They put me on statins and said, well, maybe my cholesterol's too high. I was 27 years old, and they put me on statins for the rest of my life when I was 27. Wow. So they got me on make sure you're eating 5 a day and the food pyramid, and they're doing everything that the NHS, bless them, and the British medical system, following the standard advice. But for me, it wasn't working. I was not feeling better. I was continuing to have health issues. And one day my wife comes home. I'm thinking about 29, 30 years old at the time. And she had been at one of these moms and tots group with, our little kids. And she had met some traditional Catholic lady who was into some, I don't even know what the movement was, but she made some comment that, this lady who appeared very healthy apparently eat butter and red meat all the time. Now, butter and red meat, of course, were two of those things that I had not really touched for about 3-4 years and was, really off that, and really even longer than 3-4 years. I'd eaten very little of that. And she challenged me to, this lady, through conversation with my wife, kind of loaned her a book. And I said, my health is just so bad right now. Why not? Let me try this for 2 months. And what I mean by this was eating in a more traditional way. So a lot of modern foods, so refined grains, sugars, vegetable oils, things of this nature. Just get rid of them. If it's been invented in the last 100 years, get rid of it. And go back to eating, bacon and steak. And it wasn't a carnivore diet per se. I was still eating many traditional foods, potatoes and whatnot, but really switched the way I ate. And the first week was horrible. I had withdrawals. I was shaking. Getting off sugar and getting off white flour, refined grains. It was like a drug addict coming off these really processed carbs, I remember on day 4, I was trying to write, doing sermon prep, and my hand was shaking, and the pen was shaking in my hand. I actually dreamt that night of eating shortbread, which I don't know how common that is in America right now, but very often for tea breaks, you'll have a little piece of shortbread to go with your tea. And I've been 5 whole days without shortbread. And my body was like, I was drooling and salivating in my sleep, just thinking about, the shortbread. I stuck with it. The first week, maybe 10 days, was really rough. Changing your diet radically like that, it shakes up your body. But after that, 10 days, all of a sudden it's like this fog lifted. And I began to wake up with more energy. About 2, 3, 4 weeks into it, my skin began to change complexion. I used to be very pasty white, and all of a sudden more of a yellowish, reddish undertones, like maybe, I don't know if it comes across the video, but my skin color began to change, and I found I just had more mental clarity, more energy, and I've experimented with different things since then. I've tried keto and paleo, and certainly carnivore has been a big part of that journey. I'm not a strict carnivore. I do eat fruit. Fruit's a regular part of my diet. But most every meal is based around animal products. 80% of my calories come through animal products. Right. Meat, yeah. But also dairy. Today I stopped by a local farmer where I buy a lot of raw milk. The cow was just milked this morning, and I was able to haul off several gallons of this raw milk straight from the cow. Fantastic. I just guzzle this stuff. And it's done great wonders for my health. Haven't had dental problems for about 10 years, and me and my family do really well on this. And we don't say that's for everyone, but it's certainly been a big help for us.
Well, as I say, obviously it's worked for you. And it's interesting because on the one hand, as you've seen the growth of the sort of the vegan lifestyle products, you've also got on the other end of that extreme, I've heard people like Jordan Peterson and his daughter Michaela Peterson, extolling the wonders of, almost exclusively meat diets and red meat especially, and that sort of thing. So there's always, I suppose, the different ends of these spectrums, aren't there? Okay, well, there you go, Greg. Obviously, Joshua, big fan of the meat, and actually says from a health point of view, turning back to animal products and kind of ditching some of the more processed foods has been a big help for him. Before we get into the sort of the ethical and if you like, biblical issues around this, though, you're not kind of, in a sense, as dogmatic, it sounds, as some vegans arguably are, Greg. You do see that there's an issue of conscience here, ultimately. Yeah,
I think it's very explicit in the New Testament. If Paul says in 1 Timothy or 2 Timothy, he's listing the doctrine of demons, and one of them, he says, the forbidding of meat. So it's the New Testament is against getting legalistic about this, and it's explicitly mentioned in Romans 14. Some people are okay with eating this meat, other people not. And so, that's where I understand the passion of the vegans who are, activists and everyone should be this. And I share a lot of their convictions and a lot of their passion, but the New Testament is, I think, really clear that this is not an issue that any brother should be judging another brother on or anything of the sort.
I guess the reason that maybe a lot of Christians would say, though, we're living in very different times to the New Testament, the way meat is produced, farmed, etc.
That's true.
It was a far more natural way. People were a lot more in touch, at least, with the food sources in Jesus's day. So
yeah, so I would never look down on anyone for eating meat, having different food choices than I have. There are, I think, principles that all Christians should be thinking about. So that's what I kind of advocate is we reflect on this. We're all called to have dominion and to take responsibility for the earth and the animal kingdom, and so flushing that out. I'm concerned that people think this through, think about like what the impact their food choices and lifestyle choices in general, the impact it has on animals and the impact it has on the environment. Those are, I think, things that we should all be thinking about.
And what just sketch out for us briefly, and I'll let Joshua respond, what you think the impact is on animals and the environment in terms of the way we do currently rear and eat animal products.
Yeah, well, and this wasn't my driving reason for becoming a vegetarian, though having become it, now I find other reasons to support it and stuff. One of them being health benefits. My cholesterol just went way down. I had high cholesterol before I became a vegetarian, and that disappeared. And I didn't become a vegetarian for that reason, but that's a nice fringe benefit. But I'm really concerned with the industrial farm industry. I have more trouble with people supporting the industrial farm industry than I have with somebody eating meat from a local farm. Like you see, you got your milk from a local place where they can live a natural existence. And so, for me, what I've learned about industrial farms is that a lot of those animals don't have anything natural about them. They live in an artificial, everything like a pig being stuck in an industrial farm. There's nothing natural there. They're meant to be grazing and all this other stuff, and they're not allowed to do that. And so I have no problem with folks who get their meat from a local farm where animals can live a natural existence. I still wouldn't eat that meat, but I think that's a much better choice than supporting the industrial farm industry.
So there are better choices when it comes to meat eating. I mean, would you agree with that, Joshua? Do you have any concerns yourself about the way that, the industry happens in terms of the way meat is processed and reared and so on?
Yeah, so, I mean, this isn't going to be much of a debate because I just agreed with everything Greg said on that point. And many carnivores and people who are really into this lifestyle are some of the strongest proponents of regenerative farming practices because, they're particular about their meat. They want good quality meat. They don't want meat that's just been stuffed in lots but been free to graze. So some of the biggest passionate people for reform in the whole industrialization of farming are certainly carnivores. Regenerative farming is, if you're unfamiliar with the term and all that regenerative farming implies, it'd be a great thing to Google, look up on YouTube, familiarize yourself with it. It's that returning to pre-World War II practices. And I would highlight, though, it's not just industrial livestock. It is also industrial agriculture. The monocropping of these huge fields, because you have these giant combines to harvest, giant fields of soy or corn, and year after year there's no crop rotation, there's no ecosystem for animals to be with the plants and to fertilize it naturally. It's bad news for meat and it's bad news for plants. So whether you're a vegan or a carnivore, the whole industrial movement is, it's been bad news on both sides of this, and I would be all for reform, as I think Greg would too.
Though Greg, I do usually hear vegans making the case that it is a more environmentally friendly option to go vegan. So do you have a view on that in terms of the actual impact on the planet itself of less animal, farming and so on?
Yeah, I don't know if Joshua would agree with this or not, but what I've read, and I haven't read on this topic I was big into it for a couple of years when I first started. Now I haven't kind of left it behind, but as I recall, in fact, there was this study that was done, I think, 2019, that concluded that supporting animals being raised for food take 3 times more resources than it takes 3 times more resources to support a meat-eating diet than it does a vegetarian diet, and that's largely about the industrial farms. And also about the pollution, the methane gas and all that has done. I had read this one study that showed that argued that the amount of greenhouse gases emitted by farm animals on industrial farms was greater than that of cars and trucks worldwide. And so I think it does leave a bigger negative imprint when done in industrial farms.
What do you say to that particular environmental argument, Joshua?
Yeah, so I got a few things. So I'm going to respond not just to Greg, but maybe also to some other, maybe I'll call them more feisty vegans that I've encountered that maybe have been a little more aggressive in their argumentation than a nice guy like Greg is being. But, when we talk about, not this whole thing of violence and not wanting to, kill an animal so that I can eat. My challenge to that, would be, what are we eating? Because in the age of industrialized farming, there's blood on your plate no matter what you eat. If I wanted to be a strict carnivore and eat nothing but beef and water, I could put a cow in the field behind me. Now that cow would walk on the hills and graze with, their field mice there, rabbits, moles, trees. And at the end of the year, you'd butcher the cow, and, one cow would die to feed me for, 6 months, 9 months, a year. I'm not sure. It might depend on the size of my appetite or the size of the cow. But to take that field and make it a field to grow soy or to grow corn, you have to use some large industrial machinery first to flatten the field, then a lot of machinery to take out all the rocks. Plus, how many mice are you killing? How many rabbits are you killing? How many moles are you killing? How much trees? I mean, to make these huge monoculture fields, you have to kill all the animals that lived in that field. So when you're having that soy burger or that corn or whatever, to get those giant fields that comes from, you're having to destroy some ecosystems and some habitats to make space for grains and crops of that sort. That's the industrial age we live in. Now, I don't think it has to be that way whether you're vegan or vegetarian or carnivore. I said regenerative farming. I think there is a better way, and I think Greg would agree with me. But to think that I can escape violence just by not eating meat or animal products, the system's a little more complicated than that. Okay,
Greg, respond.
I agree with that, but I would want to have as little of that as possible. The same is true as money. I don't think we have a guiltless dollar in our wallet. But in terms of my personal choices, I want to be living as justly as possible, as guileless as possible. And so, there's inevitable, think of all the insects that got killed when you plow that field and whatever. So that is what it is until we get better regenerative farming practices. But as a kingdom person, I want to be as free of that as possible and minimize it as much as possible. Have as small an negative impact on the environment as possible. That's why I think it's really good that all kingdom people, since we're called to be good stewards of the earth and the animal kingdom, need to be asking the question, it's a question that most people don't ask, and that is, what impact is my food choices here? What did the animal have to go through to get on my plate? And what did the vegetable have to go through to get on my plate? I mean, and to make choices, buying locally is greatly reduces your imprint and those kind of things.
Yeah, so I don't know what it is worldwide, but the current statistics in the United States are that for carbon emissions, 3.5% comes from livestock, 4% comes from agriculture, By comparison, 11% comes from pharmaceuticals. But again, a lot of this is about the industrialization, whether you're eating plants or animals. The regenerative, one thing that I would encourage all our listeners to look up is the regenerative farm movement, where many of these farms, probably the big example that's often held up is the big ranch in Georgia, the White Oaks farm there, where they actually have a negative carbon emission. It's actually the carbon is sequestered and going back into the ground just through their different methods of how they deal with both plants and pigs and cattle. It's by comparison to industrial farming and livestock, very friendly. And now carbon emissions isn't my field. It's not, I don't think it's Greg's field. And so I'd love to stick this close to the Bible teaching on this and not pretend to be an expert on all things carbon. But I know there's a big difference between how these things are actually raised.
After a short break, we'll see if Greg wants to come back on that. But I do want to turn as well to the biblical aspect of this, and that's what we'll do in the next segment of today's show. We're talking about veganism today. Should Christians eat meat? My guests are Greg Boyd and Joshua D. Jones. For more conversations between Christians and skeptics, subscribe to the Unbelievable podcast. And for more updates and bonus content, sign up to the Unbelievable newsletter. Welcome back to this week's edition of the show. We're talking about veganism today. Quite a few people have asked for this in the last few years, a debate on Unbelievable on veganism. Should Christians eat meat? Though I haven't selected two people with, who are poles apart in terms of their approach to this. Greg Boyd is a vegetarian transitioning to vegan, but says he's not, militaristic about it. And there will be some circumstances where he would eat meat if necessary. And likewise, he sees it a matter of conscience. However, overall, he does see that there is an ethical case and a biblical case for choosing not to eat meat, to live as violence-free as possible, as he sees it. Joshua Jones, church leader here in the UK, but from the US himself, is our carnivore on today's show, arguing for the value of eating the way that humans have for millennia when it comes to meat, but doing it in a responsible way, obviously. So we've covered a little bit. We've grazed the surface, at least, of some of the environmental health issues and so on. But let's turn to the biblical issues, Greg and Joshua, if you would. I mean, Greg, this for you, I think, comes down ultimately to a vision of what the new creation is and how Christians are supposed to be setting an example and living into that vision of new creation. Is it your view then, Greg, that if you like, in the beginning, it was a vegetarian situation and that's the vision for the new creation that actually, and I've heard lots of people reference, the lion, the lamb laying down with the lion and so on as a vision of that sort of non-violent, non-death kind of vision. What's your take on all of this, though?
Yeah, I'm struck by the line in Genesis where, however you literal, figurative, there's a million different ways of interpreting this, but Genesis 1:30, where he says, I give the plants, vegetation for everything to eat, the birds of the air, the animals, for people. And it seems like I think that's kind of God's original ideal for creation, was that it'd be entirely free of violence. And I'm impressed with then the eschatological visions that you find several times throughout Scripture, Isaiah 11 being the one that you just referenced, where the lion will lay down the lamb. And there's this, God's shalom pervades the whole creation. There's no violence in the whole creation. The child will play with the cobra. And I'm sure those are metaphors, but they point towards something. And one of the main tasks of kingdom people, as I understand it, is that we are to be the first fruits. We're called that 3 different times in the New Testament. The first fruits of the coming creation. And first fruits were always, in the Old Testament, they were the fruit that ripened early, and they were picked and then consecrated to God as a way of saying, we trust you for the rest of the harvest, and as a sign that the harvest is coming. God will keep his promise. So we're called to be early fruit. In a world of unripened fruit, we're to be the ripened fruit, to put on display something of the future. And so an ethical kind of principle that I teach a lot is that all other things being equal, if you'll be doing it in heaven, do it now. And if you won't be doing it in heaven, don't do it now. To be already in a world that's not yet. And so if there won't be any violence in heaven, in the future coming kingdom, all other things being equal, that's what I want to strive for now, as much as possible, to put that on display. So I think that God's ideal is nonviolence, we're called to be the already and not yet, and put it on display.
So will we all be vegans in heaven, Joshua, anyway? And should we try for it now?
Well, I mean, if we were to take this type of reasoning and saying, no, because we did it in Eden, or that we will be doing it in heaven, and therefore Christians should model either what we did in Eden or what we do in heaven, I'm just wondering how far we're willing to take that. I mean, Adam and Eve were walking around naked without any clothes.
Go for it, baby.
I don't know, is that something we should, as Christians, be trying to get back to? Also, the whole thing, well, if you're not going to be doing it in heaven, well, there's no marriage in heaven. Should we all embrace a celibate lifestyle and forego marriage? Should Christian women not expect to have pain in childbirth? And so if we were to take this outside of the discussion on meat and begin to apply it to many other things, I think all of us would probably agree, that's maybe not such a smart idea. There really will be quite a difference between existence in heaven and existence in Eden. That's just not appropriate for this era. As far as what the Bible says about what heaven will be like, Greg's completely right. I agree with him that a lot of this language is metaphorical, so it is hard to know. But there are metaphors too that might give us an indication that we do eat meat. I think it's Isaiah 25, that great image of the table of the Lord that'll be stretched out when death is conquered and God sets his table. He talks about I forget which verse exactly in 25, maybe verse 6 or 7, where it talks about, fatty meats and you'll be eating the marrow. That's a picture of heaven. So there is some eschatological image. I mean, even the whole land of milk and honey, those are both animal products. A strict vegan would never eat honey because it comes from bees or milk, So there is imagery that are connected with animal products that are eschatological in nature. But I agree, some of it is metaphorical.
And the other thing I would add, I suppose, Greg, the obvious thing is Jesus ate meat. He celebrated the Passover. He ate the lamb. So if Jesus is our model, then he certainly was not a vegan. Where do you go with all of these issues?
Well, that's why I qualified what I said as much as possible. I mean, in terms of ideals to strive for. And especially, I think, in terms of, we could get into parsing, like, should we go nude or should we, all those kind of things. But in terms of, like, our loving stance, I think it's the main thing is the love and the compassion, developing that kind of a character. So I think being merciful and compassionate towards animals, which, the Bible talks a lot about God's compassion towards animals, it kind of sets that in a different category than whether we'll wear clothes or not, or whether we should be wearing clothes now, which I would strongly recommend we continue doing. I mean, there's certain things we got to accommodate in the here and now. So we live in the already not yet kind of tension ourselves. So as much as possible. And so there are things that trump and I always have to, whenever I say Trump, I have to qualify myself now, since it's like, it conjures up images. We got to get a different word. But there's things that are more important than being a vegetarian. Hospitality, like when Jesus sends out the 70. These are kosher Jews, and yet he tells them, eat whatever they set before you. Because the human connectedness is more important than your particular diet. That's why after the resurrection, Jesus has fish with them. And then he passes through a wall, which I can't figure out what happens to the fish he just ate. But I think so. Fellowship is a more important consideration. But all other things being equal, when it's possible, and it's not contrary to kingdom hospitality and all those other things, I think striving for an ideal of nonviolence. For me, that was just an essential part of my call. That's the part of the not yet that I want to be alreadying as much as possible.
Go ahead, Joshua.
Yeah, so I agree in principle, but maybe just not application with Greg. When God really specifically pronounces the famous meat verses there in Genesis chapter 9, where God says, everything that moves about, I give you for food, and God, blesses and permits mankind to eat meat, he then does give it a qualification. And it is one of mercy and kindness and compassion. And that is, you're not to eat it like the other apex predators out there. You know, us humans, we're at the top of the food chain, up there with lions and great white sharks and everything. We kind of dominate the top of the food chain, and we sometimes have to compete with certain big animals, whether they're going to eat us or we're going to eat them. But we're not to eat meat the way these other apex predators do. You know, a lion will just go leap on an antelope and begin to eat it before it's dead. We are not to eat meat, it says, with the lifeblood still in it, which many commentators throughout the years have said, you know, you don't eat an animal while it's still alive. You must humanely kill it. You know, there is a kosher meat is killed in the most humane way possible, where there's minimal pain, minimal suffering, and an animal raised by a human in a kosher farm, in a farm by a righteous animal, will suffer a quicker, easier death than if left out in the wild. To when they get old, to suffer old age, or really to be eaten by other animals. So we are not to eat meat like the other animals do. There is to be. So my application for how I would want to extend mercy to nature and to the animal kingdom would come through, hey, let's make sure that the animal has a better life grazing in a farmer's field and an easier death than if that animal was in the wild competing with other animals.
So is what you're saying in that sense, Joshua, that for all Greg's, what he says about not wanting violence or to live in a less violent world by not choosing to eat meat, that actually the violence is there anyway, and it's actually up to humans what level of violence is involved with the way we do actually consume the meat that we eat.
We should not be as violent to animals as animals are to other animals. That's part of our humanity. That's part of our image of God.
I agree with that. I'm just curious, Joshua, though, do you drain the blood? Because that's part of the Genesis 9 covenant that was supposed to be an everlasting covenant, that they had to drain the blood out. In Acts 15, when they were trying to figure out how the Jews and Gentiles get along, one of the requirements was to make sure that you're not eating, that the meat has to be kosher.
Yeah.
How do you process that?
Yeah, so there are a number of different commentators who, you know, even Jewish and Christian, who talk about all that implies, the removal of the blood and what is properly kosher meat. And, you know, in Islam, they have something similar with halal. But one thing everybody is agreed on is, you know, there were pagan practices where you would eat part of the animal while it was still alive. And for a Christian or a Jew, you know, that is, you know, strictly forbidden. The animal should die humanely. Now, how much blood is drained out afterwards, or if it's just qualifying life blood versus blood, there's some debate on all that was implied in Genesis 9. But at the very least, you know, these were common pagan practices to eat meat like other animals would eat meat. And we are not to do that.
All right. What do you make of, after the flood, God enters into this covenant, and now he recites the first covenant. It has very similar terms, although he now he makes an allowance, whereas before he said, I give you all the vegetation, you and the animals and everything else for food. Now he says, I allow you to eat this meat. But it seems to me that that's an accommodation. It's like, given the circumstances of the world, for whatever reasons, God now is allowing something that wasn't allowed earlier. How do you read that?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things to point out. One is that in Genesis 1 and 2, in the pre-fall conditions, God never he never forbids the eating of meat. He puts them in a garden. He says you can eat fruit. And actually, I would argue that our first parents, depending on how literal, you know, you take the symbolism of Genesis 1 and 2, stronger case would be argued that if anything, they were fruitarians, not so much vegetarians, you know, that it was the plants bearing the seeds within them. So, you know, they were maybe eating fruit. But meat is never forbidden. It's, you know, if I have someone over my house and I have maybe baked a giant turkey, and a turkey is at the center of the table, and I say, you know, I've made a big turkey, you know, eat all you want. You know, you're free to eat all the turkey you want. In saying you're free to eat all the turkey you want, I'm not necessarily saying they can't also have a glass of milk or they couldn't eat an apple. So God did forbid something, but the only thing that was forbidden was the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's the only thing that was explicitly forbidden. God never said, thou shalt not eat meat. When you get then to Genesis 4, you have two brothers, one of which is in the agriculture business and one seems to be in livestock. That's, Cain and Abel. What was Abel doing as a shepherd? When he offered up his sacrifice, Abel offered up meat, whereas Cain offered up the vegetables. And by the way, I'm not trying to, I'm not saying people who are vegetarian are more like Cain. I'm simply saying that practice then, shepherding and having meat to offer up was already there immediately after the fall. That was long before Noah. So it seems like meat eating, at least for the righteous Abel, God did not condemn Abel. What are you doing being a shepherd? What are you doing offering me meat? It seemed to already be part of the situation. God never condemns Abel for that.
It says tree doesn't condemn it.
So I don't think it's just an accommodation. I said, he affirms it. It's almost hey, everything that moves, you are free to eat. So I think there's some room for interpretation.
Where does God affirm that?
There in Genesis 9, you are free to eat everything that moves about.
So if that was true,
he doesn't. I'm not sure he's reluctantly saying it. Well, okay, I don't want you to do it, but maybe. I mean, an instance of that would be like the Old Testament permission on divorce, where God says, I really don't want you to do it, but you're really hard of heart, so I'll kind of allow it. You don't really get that in the Old Testament provision of, for meat. I don't see. God provides meat. Jesus provides, multiplies the fishes, and gives it to people. He doesn't do that with divorce or other things where there's a permission, but kind of a reluctant permission.
So in your reading, I just to make sure I'm hearing you clearly, when God says that I give the vegetation, seeds of the plants for all the birds and for everything that moves in the ground, all that, the implicit text is, and I also give them to each other to eat. That your analogy would lead to that kind of a assessment that he just left out saying, oh, and by the way, you can eat eat the animals, whatever. That just seems a little bit stretched. But and it's true that Abel, he doesn't condemn Abel for offering this food, but it's also true that he didn't command them to offer. In fact, he doesn't command them to make sacrifices. That's something they start doing. They start doing a lot of things that he didn't command. And it seems to me that when God accommodates a lot of things in the Bible, and when he accommodates things, he never does this, well, I'd rather not, but I'm going to have to. Oh, he does in the case of divorce, but like with polygamy, he just accommodates it, and he doesn't approve of it, but he doesn't go around. It's like it's such a common practice. He works with that system to move it in a certain direction.
Sure. Well, yes and no. I mean, God doesn't specifically in a direct way, but all the stories of polygamy in the Old Testament, they usually end bad. It was like the guy wanted to take a second wife, and the story kind of goes downhill from there. Abraham takes Hagar, it goes downhill. David takes too many wives, and Solomon, it leads to paganism. At the beginning there of Samuel, there's the story of Hannah. She's the second wife, and you get the impression the husband's not having a great time with these wives fighting all the time. Jacob has 4 wives. They're constantly pregnant. He's miserable. He says, my days have been evil, and they're having a rough time. So by contrast, God actively provides meat, sometimes in miraculous ways, where it's hard not to take that as an affirmation, where God does more than just allow it, but is in a miraculous way providing for it.
Well, there is 2 Samuel 12 where after David does it up with Bathsheba, and then sends Nathan there, and he says, the Lord, gave you all these wives. Why'd you have to go after her? If you provided for you, now this judgment's coming on you. And so, even though that's not an ideal, God works within the limitations of that culture. And I'm the first to say that. Yeah. In many cultures, in fact, most cultures traditionally, I don't think vegetarian was much of an option. Although you find incredible examples of it, like Pythagoras in the 6th century. It's amazing. But on the whole, some would even argue it's a matter of privilege to be able to have this debate. A lot of the world that they don't have a lot of food options.
I mean, it should be point out that, most of the world's vegans are involuntary vegans. There's 1 billion people out there who are vegans because they're in impoverished conditions and they can't afford to get meat. And they certainly can't afford the nice supplementation for vitamin B12, vitamin D3, some of these other things that Western vegans who, eat all plant products but get these nice supplements, can. To be able to eat meat and animal products, it's something most of the world enjoys, but, the poorest 10%, they're vegan, but they don't want to be.
Arguably, that could be another sort of argument that Joshua is making there, Greg, for the naturalness, if you like, of eating meat. It is part of a balanced diet to give you all the vitamins, nutrients you need. As a vegetarian yourself, do you have to supplement because you're not eating any animal products with vitamins and so on? No,
I've had getting enough protein on a plant diet. I haven't found to be that hard at all. I mean, there's all these nuts and stuff that you can have that provide that. So it hasn't been. The only supplement I take is Tarmanac or whatever because it's anti-inflammatory. But otherwise, it's been. I mean, there's people. Matthew Scully, who wrote the book Dominion, which is, I think, one of the best books out there on merciful treatment of animals. The guy was a bodybuilder. He could press I think he said 355, and he was vegetarian, but ripped. But I don't leverage much on that because what I found is that you can be healthy or unhealthy as a meat eater or as a vegetarian. Just because you're vegetarian or vegan doesn't mean that you're healthier. I think all other things being equal, it's a healthier diet, but you got to be making sure that you're covering your bases there, as well as with meat. I think that if you're a meat eater, you got to make sure that you're getting, your roughage and all sorts of other things. So I don't leverage much on that. Sure.
Just before we come back to Joshua, Greg, you mentioned the incident of Jesus eating fish in his resurrection body. And some have argued that does show categorically that vegetarianism isn't necessarily going to be part of the new creation if Jesus is eating fish. What do you say to that particular argument?
It's a good argument. But I just have trouble believing that we'll be killing anything in heaven. That the final state of affairs, the perfection of creation, the culmination of it, will still include killing. John says death will be no more. I mean, death is the enemy. And I take that to be a global thing. Now, can I conceive of how that's going to work? Nope, I can't conceive of it. But I can't conceive of how my body's going to be transformed. So there's continuity in the next life, but there's also radical discontinuity. There'll be a new heaven and a new earth. So I don't know how it will work, but I just can't imagine there being killing in heaven. Here, it's a necessity sometimes, but I don't see that as being an eternal state of affairs.
What do you make of that, Joshua? Do you think there will be actually killing in the new creation because there will still be meat and animal products?
Well, I mean, are plants alive?
Yeah, they're not sentient though.
So, I mean, a plant has to die. I know they're not sentient and not conscious of pain in the same way humans and animals are, but, there would still be a living thing then that gets killed. I think, when we get to wondering what the new heavens and the new earth is going to be like, we're getting into an area of speculation that I don't think the Bible is entirely clear. I did point out the metaphorical description in Isaiah 25, how it does include meat, but I'm open to that. That might be metaphorical. So I would say I don't know for sure whether there'll be meat there or not, or if there is meat, if God provides it in some sort of supernatural way. It may not even be necessary. I mean, Jesus' resurrected body walked through walls, floated to heaven. So what? There will be eating in heaven. There's this great picture of heaven being like a banquet, but will we need food in the same way in our resurrected bodies? I don't know. I feel like we're getting into a lot of speculation.
I agree.
We are. I mean, but at the center of all of this, in a sense, regardless of exactly what happens in the new creation, is I think Greg's sense that killing an animal is wrong at some level. There is just something that is violent about it. Presumably you just disagree ultimately that there is anything wrong with killing an animal for this particular purpose. There are obviously worse ways of killing an animal, but that humans have a special privilege to be able to have that kind of dominion, if you like, Joshua, over the animal kingdom, which gives us the right to raise and slaughter animals.
So, I mean, will that apply also to all other animals? You know, there are some animals whose digestive system is explicitly carnivore. They're not like us. We're omnivores. We can go back and forth between plants and, meat. But some animals, just the way they're designed is specifically to, eat insects or to eat other animals. In the new creation, will they continue to eat insects? Will they continue to eat smaller animals? Or will God give them whole new digestive systems? Are animals allowed to eat other animals in the new creation? We don't know.
Yeah,
this could get into tall weeds, but if we're going to go down a notch further on this, we'd ask about to what degree is nature as we now have it reflective of God's original plan for nature, and to what degree is it corrupted? And I've elsewhere argued that the fact that Jesus, when he comes upon all these infirmities, he and the gospel authors diagnose it as being something that is not of God. They're afflicted. He treats them as victims. But those are things that we would just call natural evil today. Like the lady with scoliosis, that happens given the laws of nature as they are now. But if Jesus diagnoses it as being something demonic, that tells me that the laws of nature as they are now are not necessarily identical to the laws which God really originally created. And so
what?
Go ahead.
I'd say what our resurrected body will need to function does not necessarily correlate with what our unresurrected body here it needs to function.
Absolutely.
We don't know. And so the idea that, in heaven we'll be doing this or in heaven we'll be doing that, therefore we should try to do it, all sorts of different groups have speculated to that, and sometimes that's led some groups to mass celibacy or could lead to, different lifestyle choices which, short of the resurrection of the dead, maybe aren't that practical, let's say. So just to say we do it, in the new heavens and the new earth with our resurrected bodies, and I don't know if that's necessarily maybe the strongest argument, therefore, for adopting a vegan lifestyle. I think maybe some of your other arguments were stronger.
Well, it's specific to it's predicated on the conviction that the kingdom of God will be free of violence. And it'll be free of violence because of the love and compassion, the non-necessity of killing, and the love and compassion that we reflect towards the earth and the animal kingdom, which was our first mandate. I mean, this is an important topic because our first mandate in the Bible was to have dominion and to reflect God's character in the way that we do that. And he has compassion on the animals and provides for them, and so that's one of our jobs. But I think that the final state will be one that's free of violence and full of love. And that's what I want to incarnate as much as possible. There's all sorts of things we have to accommodate here and now just because of the way this fallen physicality that we have. But that core attitude is the one that is the most important to me. Am I heavenly in terms of my attitude towards the earth and the animal kingdom?
We'll come back to this and allow you a response, Joshua. We're just going to go into the final part of our show in just a moment. We're debating veganism today. Really interesting discussion. We've been taking it on a biblical trajectory with my guests Greg Boyd and Joshua D. Jones in this last segment, and we'll conclude our conversation in just a moment's time.
In the United Kingdom, just today, we passed 100,000 people who've been killed by the virus. I'm not the one here who is claiming that this is being supervised, that somebody is watching this, somebody knows that this is occurring, and somebody's allowing it to occur.
We're in no position to say definitively there is no morally justifiable reason for this particular evil, because we need a godlike perspective on all of space and all of time in order to make that claim.
So, concluding our discussion today on veganism, it's our big vegan debate. Should Christians eat meat? Though it's really quite moderate, really, in many ways. I could have had probably a more, if you like, extreme vegan perspective on than Greg Boyd. Greg Boyd, though, says he is transitioning to vegan, and he believes that is the best ethical, as far as he can see, way to be a Christian in the world today. Though he does not, he won't be bashing down any doors to turn anyone forcibly vegan, though I'm sure most vegan activists wouldn't do that anyway. But nonetheless, there has been differences of opinion between you both. I mean, at a very banal, simplistic level, Greg, one of the most obvious reasons why people don't choose to be vegetarian or vegan is just they love the taste of meat. They love the way. They love a hot dog. They couldn't imagine life without a T-bone steak, and I can imagine an argument that simply goes, if God made something this good that is kind of works with our body so well, why would he deny us it? That's an argument. I'm not saying it's the best argument, but it's an argument. What would you say to that, Greg?
Well, it just reminds me of guy I know is a pothead, and it's, if God didn't want me to smoke a lot of pot, why would he make it so enjoyable? If God didn't want us to eat it, why would he make it so tasty? I don't think that's a terribly good argument. But if you're asking, why is it possible for us to eat meat and benefit from it if God didn't want it that way, I'd go back to my accommodation argument, that there's a lot of things that God accommodates given this fallen world and stuff. And we got to be okay with that. And people are at different places in their spiritual walk. And that's why we can't be legalistic about this. And that's why the New Testament forbids being legalistic about this. And so we have to each follow our own calling. But I think it's, as much as possible, though it's permitted, sometimes God calls us to a higher thing. Paul says all things are permissible, but not all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient. And so, I find that, one of the things that I haven't mentioned this yet, but the things that that concern me, it's another factor in this, is that I think violence desensitizes us to violence. And Pythagoras said this in the 6th century BC. He says any civilization that allows for the killing of animals will eventually be allowing for the killing of each other, or will find themselves killing each other. He's catching on that violence tends to be contagious. And I found that just cutting it off at the root and not conceding any of it, it makes you more sensitive to the violence around you, but also opens your eyes to see a beauty that you haven't seen before. You see things for their intrinsic worth rather than just for their utility. Cow's not just good for this, it's got its own kind of intrinsic beauty. And so, given how, especially here in America, our culture is so incredibly violent, and it's escalating because we just get desensitized to it. And so I think the more we can do to sensitize ourselves to violence, the better. And purging, for me, it's a carte blanche. I want to purge it all from my life. And I've just found it to be one of the most significant decisions I ever made in terms of adjusting my own presence in the world, my own way of being in the world, my own way of seeing in the world. This purging of violence has just been absolutely essential, and I'm still in process on it. But I think it's a journey that, however people apply it, I would encourage them to accept that principle.
Yeah, Joshua, do you reject the idea that there is violence essentially involved in eating meat?
Well, no, I don't. But, let's define the term violence. Now, this could lead us into a huge discussion, especially since I'm speaking with Greg Boyd, and the author of The Crucifixion of the Warrior God. He said quite a lot about violence, and I do believe there is a principle of nonviolence within Christianity. Without trying to go down a path that would take us far away from food, I would say Greg probably takes that principle of nonviolence and has a much broader application that transcends many categories, and how he applies that in a way that I would not work out that same application. I acknowledge there is a nonviolent principle in Scripture, but to me it has a certain category. And taking that to the realm of, let's say, not killing an animal to eat meat would, for me, be taking it beyond the category that the Bible actually lays it out for. Just, to pick, there probably could be other examples, but that would maybe be a different discussion. If him and I ever had dinner one day and he had a salad and I had my steak, we could talk about all those other things. I would be hard-pressed to have historical examples that vegetarians or vegans are necessarily more nonviolent. I was just going through a book by Eugene Cho, Eugene Bach, on the history of China, and one thing they just ironically they mentioned was that in the early church, one large group of missionaries were annihilated by this Chinese vegan or vegetarian sect, completely wiped out and martyred by these Chinese vegetarians, which I thought was funny because I knew this debate was coming up. But I don't know. A lot of the Roman statesmen, vegetarianism and veganism was popular among some of the Roman thinkers. But they were also involved in some pretty bloody, violent behavior as well. So I think it would take a lot to make a case that vegans and vegetarians are always less violent than meat eaters.
Hitler was a teetotaling vegetarian. So
yeah, okay. Hitler was a vegetarian. There you go. I win. That's debate over. Hitler was a vegetarian.
But you would agree, would you, Joshua, that I think it's kind of self-evident that violence desensitizes you to violence. It's
well, I know you think that, Greg, but you have a whole fundamental view of violence that's a little bit different than, to put it moderately, would you say some of your beliefs about violence is a little bit different than how some other Christians see the issue?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So, but then we're going to get into a philosophy of violence that I think could take us very far from the subject of food.
No, but we can keep it simple enough.
No, the answer is no, I don't.
You don't
I don't agree with that premise.
Will you kill a cow because you enjoy the taste of it? How is that not violent?
No, I'm not saying there's not a type of violence to that, but it's the idea that if you have that, because I have a cow killed, or I kill a cow or hunt my own food, therefore I'm more likely to go out and kill somebody else.
Oh, yeah, it's not that simple. That
violence of one type always necessarily leads to violence of another type. There are types of violence that are permissible and that are good, even that have a redemptive value to it. Now, you might not agree with that, but I would say that there are types of violence that are beneficial.
Yeah, I would agree when you're in a situation where it's necessary, and it's beneficial because you like the taste of it. That's the benefit, and you get the protein from it and stuff. But if possible to avoid it, why should I kill an animal because I enjoy it? It just seems like, but that's me talking here. Okay, that's I don't want to kill anything if I can avoid it. Why should I? I didn't create it. If it's necessary, I will. But it seems to me that it's more honoring to it to say, I'm not going to eat you.
Sure. But you would say, if you were to take a survey, it would be difficult to say that hunters, people who go out and hunt their own food, be it turkey or deer, that they are not necessarily more likely to go out and shoot their next door neighbor.
No, I don't think that they're more likely to go shoot their neighbor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Though they might be desensitized in other ways towards violence.
I mean, this takes us slightly off topic just at the very end of the show, but some of my non-Christian friends who are vegans, they do it for not obviously for any biblical reason, but because they actually believe any sentient life essentially has a similar kind of value to human life, and so the Peter Singers of this world would say actually you might be better off saving the burning building full of pigs than the one burning building with one child inside it, because there's a sort of value. Now, do you, Greg, in any way trade off the kind of value of animal life over human life, or would you say no, human life always trumps?
No, I think that, and I have friends who are these radical egalitarians where all life is equal, and that strikes me as not just improbable or impractical, but absurd. If a house is on fire, I love my dog to death. I love my dog. But if I have to choose between my daughter and my dog, I'm going to go for my daughter. I think there's more worth there. I think Jesus died for all creation, but that doesn't mean all creation has equal worth. And so we're made in the image of God, and we're the only ones that are said to have that title. And so I think there's an honor there, that there's a hierarchy there. But the hierarchy is, as much as possible, to be governed with compassion, love, and gentleness, and then than to having a power over and I have rights over you and therefore I can.
Sure.
I think that's the difference of the kingdom.
Yeah. No, I was just interested to hear what your perspective would be on that. I mean, presumably, Joshua, you broadly agree with that, the idea of a hierarchy, and presumably, in your view, it does. And we'll kind of start to end here. It does, though, give a sense of there is a right that humans have to animal life, as part of the natural order of food and the life cycle and so on.
And I'm only saying that you don't have to exercise that right, and you might want to consider not exercising that right. You might find that it opens up things for you that wouldn't otherwise be opened up. That's all I'm saying.
I appreciate that, Greg. Thank you.
You have the right. I bless you.
Thank you.
Well, I would love to sit down for a meal of whatever type with both of you one day to hash this out more, but we're going to have to leave it here for now. Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you so much, Joshua.
Been a pleasure.
I should have mentioned your websites already, but I'll make sure they're with the show so people can click through. You can find out more about Greg at renew.org, that's renew with a K, or whchurch.org for the church Woodland Hills that Greg ministers at. Joshua D. Jones at Blue Cheese Whiskey, if you want to follow him on Twitter. I'll make sure there's a way you can do that from today's show. And you might want to check out his books as well. That includes, was it A Brief Biblical Theology of Meat? There you go. You're holding up to the camera.
Brief. It's only about 65 pages. Meat, a brief biblical theology. Have a lot of this information on it.
All right. Well, look, it's been great to have you both on. Greg and Joshua, thanks for being with me today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Sure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Justin.
Nice meeting you, Joshua.
For more conversations between Christians and skeptics, subscribe to the Unbelievable podcast. And for more updates and bonus content, sign up to the Unbelievable newsletter.